The rent check still sat unopened on the counter when my son smirked and said, "You'll never own anything." As I wiped down the same kitchen I'd cleaned for 20 years, I didn't argue, just nodded once. While the stale smell of his cologne lingered in the air, it mixed with something sharper: disrespect. The same roof he lorded over me was built on my back, and he knew it. That's when I made a call. Not to beg, but to buy. He charged me monthly, so I bought the deed and handed him the eviction notice. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The clatter of silverware was the only thing keeping the room from going silent after Brian cleared his throat and said, far too casually, "So, Mom, I'm raising the rent next month. Just a standard adjustment." Evelyn Ward's knife paused mid-cut over her salmon. Nothing dramatic. No jolt. Just the briefest stillness, the kind a person gives when they're making sure they heard correctly. Across from her, the Blue Ridge Mountains glowed through the dining room window, soft sunset oranges fading into early blue. It should have been a peaceful evening. Instead, her son was recalculating her life without looking her in the eye. "How much of an adjustment?" she asked, voice even, careful. Brian shrugged like he was discussing a minor schedule change. 500 more, the market's up. Taxes, repairs, inflation. Everything hits landlords harder than tenants. You get it. Evelyn did not get it. Her pension had increased by barely $28 last year, but she didn't say that. She simply set her fork down and folded her napkin on her lap, the way teaching for 35 years had trained her to. Quiet, orderly, calm even when something was undeniably wrong. "Brian," she said softly, "why does my rent keep increasing faster than my income? I'm doing everything I can to stay on top of expenses." Kelsey leaned back in her chair, arms crossed delicately, manicured nails tapping against the stem of her wineglass. "Evelyn, financial stress just isn't something you're built for. It's better if Brian handles everything. He has the head for it." Brian smirked. There it was. That familiar curl of his mouth she used to mistake for confidence when he was younger. Now she understood it was a mask, one that cracked whenever he needed control. "Mom," he said, chuckling as if she were being adorable instead of reasonable, "you're never going to own property. Let's just be realistic." He gestured vaguely at the walls of the duplex. "This is the arrangement that works. You pay, I take care of the headaches." Evelyn blinked once. No anger, no flinch. Just a deep, steadying breath as she tucked his words away the same way she had saved report cards, tax documents, and warranty receipts. Neatly, precisely, where she'd always be able to find them again. Across from her, 14-year-old Maya froze with her fork halfway up. Her eyes, wide, brown, too perceptive for her age, flicked between her father's gloating face and her grandmother's stillness. She knew that look. Everyone in the family did. It was the expression Evelyn wore when something hurt, but she refused to bleed in public. Kelsey turned her attention to the table centerpiece, a vase of sun-bleached hydrangeas, and added lightly, "It's not that you can't handle things, Evelyn. It's just, life is simpler when you let the younger people worry about the real-world stuff." Evelyn nodded politely, as if the conversation had turned to weather patterns instead of the economics of her survival. "I see." Brian didn't notice her tone. He was already pouring himself more wine. "Rent is due on the 1st, same as always. But with the adjustment, I'll need the full amount on time. There's no wiggle room now." Of course there wasn't, Evelyn thought. He hadn't given her wiggle room in years. Under the table, she felt a hand, small, warm, trembling slightly, reach for hers. Maya didn't look at her. She kept her gaze down, pretending to pick at her salad, but her fingers tightened around Evelyn's as if anchoring her. Evelyn gently squeezed back. Brian continued talking, about lawn maintenance he didn't actually do, repairs he never handled, imagined costs she was supposedly responsible for. He spoke as though she should be grateful he allowed her to live in the house at all. Evelyn let the words wash over her without absorbing a drop. Her mind was already shifting, reorganizing, filing, calculating. She had spent decades helping children who underestimated themselves learn to see the truth about their own capability. Now it was her turn. When dinner ended, Kelsey asked brightly, "Coffee before you head home?" Evelyn smiled. "No, thank you. I should get back." She rose from the table with quiet grace, but not before casting one last glance at her son. Brian didn't see the look. Maya did. And as Evelyn slipped on her jacket and stepped toward the door, Maya whispered so softly it almost vanished into the room. "Grandma, you okay?" Evelyn nodded, but her eyes, steady, focused, unblinking, held something new. Something Brian would never see coming. The next morning, the Asheville Public Library smelled of old paper, dusted sunlight, and quiet ambition. Evelyn slipped into her usual corner table, the one near the large window overlooking Pack Square, carrying a notebook, 2 sharpened pencils, and a calmness that felt newly fortified. But beneath that calm ran something steadier, clearer, purpose. She opened a beginner's real estate guide, its pages crisp and intimidating, diagrams of loan structures and equity charts staring back at her. For decades, these terms had floated somewhere outside her world, the kind of language Brian insisted she didn't need to worry about. Now she studied each page with the same focus she'd once used to help struggling third graders understand fractions. Patient, methodical, unyielding. She mouthed phrases under her breath. Escrow accounts, fixed-rate mortgage, liens. She took notes in neat, looping cursive. She reread paragraphs until every sentence clicked. She was so absorbed she didn't notice someone marching toward her until a purse landed on the table with a thud. "All right," Harriet Collins said, hands on hips, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "What did he do this time?" Evelyn lifted her gaze slowly. Harriet knew her too well. Concern radiated from her like heat from asphalt. "Good morning to you too," Evelyn said softly. Harriet pulled out a chair without waiting for permission. "Don't start with pleasantries. You're reading real estate law books. Real estate. Law. Books." Something happened. Evelyn closed her notebook with deliberate care, the way she used to when bracing herself to tell a parent their child had cheated on a spelling test. "Brian raised the rent again," she said. "500 this time." Harriet's jaw clenched. "That man is—" "That isn't all," Evelyn added. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't embellish it. She simply repeated Brian's words, exactly as he'd delivered them. "You're never going to own property. Let's be realistic." Harriet went stone still. The kind of stillness born not of shock but of fury. The cold, calculating kind that meant she was already fitting puzzle pieces together and finding a picture she didn't like. "That smug little—" Harriet hissed, cutting herself off only because they were in the quiet zone. "You've been paying him rent for how long? 15 years? And he talks to you like you're a liability?" Evelyn folded her hands. "I'm tired, Harriet. Tired of not knowing where my money actually goes. Tired of being spoken to like I'm incapable of understanding basic life." Harriet exhaled, grabbed her purse again, and stood. "We're not sitting around. We're gathering every single document you've got." 2 hours later, Evelyn's dining table was covered in papers. Years of rent receipts, neatly logged bank statements, printed texts from Brian reminding her of due dates like she were a delinquent tenant instead of his mother. Harriet moved around the room with the precision of a retired paralegal who had spent decades tracking down inconsistencies for attorneys who relied on her more than they ever admitted. "Good Lord, Evelyn," she murmured, Flipping over another statement, "You're organized enough to run a forensic accounting unit." Evelyn allowed herself a small, wry smile. Teacher habits never leave. Together, they sorted, highlighted, created tabs, and built a timeline so precise even a court clerk would approve. By late afternoon, Harriet stepped back and surveyed the table. "This is a gold mine. If he's been taking advantage of you, these will tell us." Evelyn nodded, but her eyes drifted to the corner flyer she'd brought home from the library, a seniors' homeowners workshop hosted at the community center. "I think I'm going to that tonight," she said quietly. Harriet stared at her. "You are absolutely going." The workshop was small, 9 attendees seated in metal folding chairs, a retired mortgage counselor speaking with the warmth of someone who remembered what it was like to buy a first home in a world that felt simpler. Evelyn took notes furiously, asking questions with the gentle persistence of someone who had just discovered her own power. Terms Brian had always dismissed as too complicated for her now unfolded with surprising clarity. When the event ended, she lingered, absorbing every pamphlet and resource sheet the counselor offered. She walked out into the cool mountain air feeling lighter, taller somehow. Her phone buzzed. A text from Brian. "Rent due Friday. Don't be late." The words hit differently now. Less like a rule, more like a threat he assumed she would obey. Evelyn stared at the screen, the glow reflecting in her calm, resolute eyes. This wasn't fear. This wasn't resignation. This was the moment she realized he had no idea how fast the ground beneath him was shifting. The county clerk's archive smelled faintly of old paint and older secrets. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a washed, indifferent glow across rows of metal filing cabinets. Most people walked in here to settle routine matters: marriage licenses, deed copies, property line disputes. Evelyn walked in with Harriet beside her, both moving with the quiet determination of women who had run out of patience. The clerk, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a half-finished coffee, glanced up. "Morning. What can I help you find?" Harriet stepped forward, crisp and purposeful. "Property records for 182 Cedar Brook Lane." Evelyn felt her pulse thrum once, solid and low. Her home. The place she'd paid rent on for more than a decade. The place Brian controlled without ever allowing her a glimpse behind the curtain. The clerk typed quickly, brows narrowing. "You the owner?" "I'm the tenant," Evelyn said calmly, "and the mother of the owner." A flicker of sympathy crossed the clerk's face. She turned the screen slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough to avoid the rigid, staff-only angle. "You're allowed to view public record copies," she said. "Give me a second." Harriet squeezed Evelyn's forearm gently. "Whatever we find, you're not facing it alone." Evelyn nodded, though her eyes stayed fixed on the clerk's hands as they sorted through printouts. At last, the clerk slid a small stack of papers across the counter. "These are the most recent filings: mortgage info, loan status, payment history." Evelyn reached for them with steady fingers, but her breath caught when she saw the first document. "Past due, 3 months. Variable rate adjustment, increased." Another page. "Delinquency notice sent to borrower." Harriet leaned in, scanning the page with growing disbelief. "He's behind," she whispered. "Significantly. Evelyn. He's barely holding that house together." Evelyn felt something subtle shift inside her, like the quiet click of a lock turning. For years, she'd believed Brian had everything under control, that his dismissiveness came from competence rather than fear. But this was the truth he'd buried beneath rent increases and patronizing smiles. Harriet flipped to the next page and let out a slow, furious breath. Variable rate loan. Of all the reckless decisions, he let the rate float. That's practically begging for trouble in this market. Evelyn read every line carefully, her eyes tracing numbers she now understood because she'd forced herself to learn. Each increase, each missed payment, each overdue notice stitched itself into a story that made painful sense. Brian wasn't raising her rent to cover expenses. He was drowning, and he expected her to sink quietly with him. Harriet snapped the folder shut. You need to talk to an attorney, someone who knows property law cold. Evelyn nodded slowly. I will. I just want everything in order first. At home, the dining table looked less like a place for meals and more like a command center. She laid out the documents she and Harriet had organized the day before. 5 years of rent receipts arranged chronologically, every bank withdrawal highlighted, every text printed and dated. The room felt colder as she worked, not from temperature but clarity. She had documented her life as a tenant under her own son, and now she could see exactly how tightly he'd tried to grip her future while losing control of his own. Around sunset, a knock sounded on the door. Evelyn opened it to find Marianne, her next-door neighbor, bundled in a fleece jacket and looking uneasy. Hey, Evelyn, I'm not trying to pry, but… Marianne lowered her voice. Did everything work out with Brian? I keep seeing bank envelopes in his mailbox, the kind with big red lettering. Evelyn matched her calm tone. What kind of lettering? The kind that says, urgent, foreclosure notice. Evelyn felt the words settle into place like the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't wanted to complete. Thank you for telling me, she said kindly. After Marianne left, Evelyn stood at her dining table staring down at the documents. Her rent payments, his missed mortgage payments, the widening gap between them. It wasn't anger that rose in her chest. It was understanding. Dangerous, steady understanding. Daniel Price's office sat on the second floor of a modest brick building overlooking downtown Asheville. Nothing flashy, nothing intimidating. Just clean lines, warm lighting, and shelves filled with thick legal volumes that looked as though they'd been opened more often than dusted. It was the kind of place built for truth, not theatrics. Evelyn clutched her folder as she stepped inside, Harriet walking beside her with that fierce, coiled energy she carried whenever she believed someone she loved had been wronged. A receptionist guided them through a glass door and into a quiet conference room. Minutes later, Daniel entered. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a calmness that seemed stitched into his posture. He introduced himself with a gentle handshake, then motioned to the stack of documents on the table. Let's take a look, he said. Evelyn opened the folder with the same slow, precise care she used when grading essays, wanting everything to be correct, fair, clear. Page after page slid across the table. Rent receipts, bank statements, mortgage delinquency notices, screenshots of texts, spreadsheets Harriet had created with color-coded highlights. Daniel reviewed the first few documents quietly, then the next few, then more. With every page he turned, his eyebrows rose a little higher, subtle, but unmistakable. At last he leaned back slightly, tapping a finger on one of the statements. How long? He asked, voice measured but edged with disbelief. Has your son been charging you this amount for rent? Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. 15 years. He said he handled everything so I didn't have to worry. And you trusted that? He asked, not judgmental, genuinely trying to understand. I trusted my son, Evelyn said quietly. I thought he was doing right by me. I didn't realize I was covering more than the mortgage, by a lot. Harriet let out a short, sharp exhale. She trusted him because she's his mother. He repaid that by bleeding her dry. Daniel didn't argue. He simply adjusted his glasses and pulled a legal pad closer. What you've brought me is substantial, very organized. He glanced at Evelyn with something like admiration. It's clear you've done your homework. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. Not embarrassment, but a quiet pride she hadn't felt in years. Daniel continued. North Carolina has strong protections for seniors who are financially exploited by family members, overcharging rent, hiding loan delinquencies, demanding payments without transparency. These aren't small issues. Evelyn's pulse steadied. She had expected this meeting to bring clarity, maybe answers. She hadn't expected the validation that came with his tone. Daniel flipped to the mortgage delinquency notice. Given the state of this loan, your son is in a precarious position. If the bank continues down this path, the property could be listed for auction, possibly without him realizing how soon. Harriet nodded sharply. Which is why she needs you to guide her, fully, aggressively. Daniel offered a small, reassuring smile. Let's take this one step at a time. First, we document everything. He placed a sticky note on the top page. And second, Evelyn, you need to understand your options. You are not powerless in this. Evelyn swallowed. I don't want to hurt him. I just want stability and honesty. Daniel's expression softened. Wanting to protect yourself isn't hurting him. It's correcting the imbalance he created. Harriet crossed her arms. Amen. Daniel folded his hands. There's something else you may want to look into. Local property auctions. If this house enters pre-foreclosure, and given the loan status, it's a real possibility, you might be able to position yourself as a buyer, cleanly, legally. Evelyn absorbed the idea slowly, like letting water soak into dry soil. Buying the house. The home she'd paid for over and over, with nothing to show for it. The place Brian assumed she would never own. I'd need to learn more, she murmured. Daniel nodded. I can walk you through the legal side, but the process itself. There are community workshops, online listings, weekend auctions. It's a lot to absorb, but you strike me as someone who can handle a steep learning curve. Evelyn felt Harriet's hand rest on her shoulder. You can, and you should. The room quieted, the weight of possibility settling around them. Daniel slid the folder back toward her. Take tonight to review everything. Tomorrow we can begin mapping out a plan. Evelyn gathered the papers slowly, deliberately, as if each page were a piece of armor she hadn't realized she'd been assembling. When she and Harriet stepped out of the office, the hallway felt brighter than when they'd entered. At the elevator, Evelyn paused, pulling out her notebook, the one filled with real estate terms she'd barely known a week ago. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote 2 words in neat, unwavering script. Property auctions. As the elevator doors opened, her phone buzzed in her hand. Brian. Did you get my message? Rent's due soon. Don't make this difficult. Evelyn stared at the screen, her jaw tightening. Not with fear, but resolve. The next morning, Evelyn returned to Daniel's office with the same folder pressed lightly against her chest, though this time, she carried it like a shield instead of a burden. Harriet kept pace beside her, determined, silent, and visibly bracing for whatever new truth waited behind that glass conference room door. Daniel was already seated when they entered. The moment he looked up, Evelyn recognized something in his expression, professional calm wrapped tightly around information far heavier than yesterday's. Please, he said, gesturing for them to sit. We need to talk about the status of your son's property. Evelyn eased into her chair. Harriet didn't sit. She hovered behind Evelyn like a guard ready to intercept a blow. Daniel folded his hands on the table. I pulled updated records from the bank's legal notices this morning. He exhaled, steady but serious. The house is officially in pre-foreclosure. The words landed like a sudden gust through an open window, cold, sharp, shifting the air around her. Harriet let out a low curse under her breath. He didn't tell her. He didn't tell anyone. Daniel continued. The bank has already started internal procedures. They're preparing to list the property quietly to recover losses, No public announcement yet, but it's imminent. Evelyn felt her pulse thrum, not with fear, but with clarity. So this was why Brian had raised her rent. Why he had tightened every screw, every rule. Why he smirked when he told her she'd never own property, because he himself was losing the only property he controlled. He was drowning, she murmured, more to herself than the room. He wasn't protecting me. He was trying to keep himself afloat. Daniel nodded gently. The overcharges align almost exactly with the loan increases. He was using your rent to plug the holes in a sinking ship. Evelyn looked down at her hands, steady, unshaking. A strange sensation washed through her, not anger, not betrayal, but the quiet settling of long-missed truth falling into exactly the slots it belonged. Harriet placed both palms on the back of Evelyn's chair. Then we don't wait. We prepare a clean, fast offer before the bank moves. She turned to Daniel. Tell her what she needs. Daniel pulled a packet from his briefcase and set it in front of Evelyn. If you want to pursue this, I can position you as a preferred early bidder. You've got two major advantages. He raised a finger. One, you already live there? You're an occupant buyer. Banks like stability. A second finger. Two, you have documented proof of consistent payments for over a decade. That shows reliability. Harriet smirked. Let's see Brian compete with that. Evelyn couldn't help the small, rueful smile that tugged at her lips. It felt foreign and familiar at once, like rediscovering a part of herself she'd misplaced somewhere between rent increases and condescending remarks. What do I need to do? She asked. Daniel opened the packet. First, gather your available funds, pension accounts, personal savings, any small investments. Second, obtain a pre-approval letter. I already contacted a trusted loan officer who can expedite that process if you choose. Third, he met her eyes, steady and sure. Be ready to move quickly. Once the bank lists it, you may only have a small window. Evelyn nodded slowly. Her hands moved almost on instinct, opening her notebook, writing down every step, underlining key terms. She absorbed each instruction with the same quiet intensity she'd once used to learn every name in a new classroom on the first day of school. This time, though, she was preparing not for children, but for her own future. When the meeting ended, Daniel shook her hand with something that felt almost like respect. You're more prepared than most clients who've been dealing with this for months, he said softly. You'll be okay. Outside in the parking lot, Harriet linked her arm through Evelyn's. You're doing the right thing. Don't doubt it for a second. Evelyn didn't. For the first time in years, she didn't. They drove straight to the bank, where Evelyn requested account statements, withdrawal histories, and pension distribution options. She moved with crisp decisiveness, answering questions clearly, asking for printouts, reviewing numbers with a steady gaze. By the time she returned to her car, she had an entire folder, thick, substantial, filled with the financial tools she needed to stand on her own. As they pulled into her driveway, the mailbox caught her eye. It hung open. Inside were envelopes, two of them bearing the same red lettering Marianne had described. But these weren't addressed to Brian's house. These were addressed to her unit. Harriet froze. Why would the bank... Evelyn reached in, fingers brushing the cold paper. Brian was still striding toward her, jaw tight, hands balled into irritated fists, when Evelyn slipped the red letter envelopes fully into her mailbox and closed the metal door with a soft, decisive click. She didn't rush. She didn't shrink. She simply folded her hands in front of her and waited. But Brian didn't stop to speak. He walked straight past her, eyes flicking over her face just long enough to register suspicion, then immediately dropped to the ground as he crouched to examine the mailbox. He yanked it open so hard it rattled. Empty. The relief that crossed his face was quick and fleeting, but she saw it. saw it for what it truly was. Panic temporarily soothed, not solved. He slammed the mailbox shut, muttered something under his breath, and stalked back to his car, too flustered to even acknowledge her. The tires spit gravel as he drove off. Evelyn watched until the vehicle disappeared around the bend. Only then did her phone buzz with a message. Brian. Need rent ASAP. Don't make this a problem. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For 15 straight years she had responded immediately, sometimes apologetically, sometimes nervously, always obediently. This time she simply locked her phone and slipped it into her purse without a single word. Harriet exhaled beside her, arms crossed. Well, that's new. It won't be the last time, Evelyn replied. The dining table became a battlefield again, but this time with purpose. Harriet spread out account statements, pension summaries, and the pre-approval paperwork Daniel had recommended. The late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, striping the table in lines of gold that made every line item look sharper, every number more real. You're close, Harriet said, flipping through a calculator like an old pro. Closer than you think. Evelyn nodded. She felt it too, the narrow but steady pathway forward, carved inch by her own hands. She studied every sheet, underlined every figure, cross-checked every column. Her senses felt heightened, sharpened, awake in a way she hadn't felt in decades. She wasn't just managing her life anymore, she was steering it. They were halfway through confirming pension disbursement options when Evelyn's phone buzzed again. Brian. Mom? Rent? Today? You're cutting it close. Another buzz. Hello? A third. Are you ignoring me? Evelyn didn't look up from the document in her hand. He's expecting me to drop everything. Harriet snorted. Let him expect. Expectations aren't entitlements. For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself a quiet smile at that. Just after sunset, as Harriet was packing up her purse, a rapid, angry pounding shook the front door. 3 short hits. A pause. Then 3 more. Louder. Harriet stopped mid-motion. He didn't. But he had. Evelyn opened the door to find Brian on the porch, breathing hard. Cheeks flushed with the same indignant panic he'd shown at the mailbox, now multiplied. Why aren't you answering me? He demanded. I've texted you all day. Rent's due and I can't afford... He cut himself off, jaw snapping shut. You know it's the schedule. You're slipping, Mom. Harriet stepped into view behind Evelyn, arms folded. She's not slipping. She's busy. Brian's eyes narrowed. Busy with what? Evelyn held his gaze steadily, calmly, evaluating my expenses. Something flickered in him. Fear, frustration, something he didn't want her to see. But he masked it quickly, lifting his chin. You don't need to evaluate anything, just keep to the routine. It works. For you, Harriet muttered. Brian ignored her. His voice softened in that manipulative way he'd perfected years ago. Mom, come on. Don't start making this complicated. I'm not, Evelyn said. I'm simply being thorough. He blinked, thrown off by how simple and unmoved her tone was. Then he scoffed, waving her off like an inconvenience. You know what? Fine. Pay me later tonight. I have things to handle. He turned and stormed back down the walkway, every step stiff with irritation. He didn't look back. Not once. When his car peeled away, Harriet shut the door with a decisive click. He assumes he's still the one calling the shots. Evelyn ran a thumb over the edge of her notebook. He won't think that for long. She sat down at the table again, smoothing the surface of her documents, aligning everything perfectly in a way that steadied her heartbeat. She felt the shift, an internal click, like something locking into place. For years, she'd been the one waiting on his terms. Now he was the one waiting on hers. Hours later, The house was quiet. Harriet had gone home. The documents were neatly organized in a new binder Evelyn had labeled Property Purchase, 2024. She flipped through one last page, confirming the number Daniel had highlighted earlier, the amount she needed to finalize pre-approval. She was close. Very close. Her phone buzzed once more, lighting up the darkened room. Brian. I'll be by early tomorrow. We need to talk. The following Friday morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of Asheville morning where the mist draped low over the Blue Ridge like a curtain ready to rise. Evelyn stepped out of Harriet's car with her binder tucked firmly under her arm. Daniel's law office came into view, brick, steady, familiar. Today, though, it felt like the threshold to a different life. Inside, Daniel greeted them with a warmth that didn't undercut his professionalism. "Everything's ready," he said, motioning toward the conference room. "The bank accepted your offer. All that's left is your signature." Evelyn's heart fluttered once. Nervousness, excitement, disbelief, all tangled. She'd spent years thinking of this house as something she borrowed, something she could lose with a single text from her son. Now she was about to claim it outright. Daniel slid the paperwork across the table. "Take your time," he said gently, "but everything is in order." Evelyn read every line, not because she doubted him, but because she'd promised herself she would never again sign anything in blind trust. Harriet hovered behind her like an electric force, fingers drumming with impatient triumph. When Evelyn finally lifted the pen, her hand didn't shake, not even a little. The pen met paper. Stroke after stroke, signature after signature. With the final flourish, Daniel gathered the documents and pressed a blue stamp onto the last page. A crisp, decisive thud. "It's done," he said, smiling. "The deed is yours, Evelyn." "Exclusively yours?" For a heartbeat, she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, not with grief, but something close to awe. A quiet, overwhelming sense of reclaiming every piece of dignity she'd let Brian chip away at over the years. Harriet broke the silence with a jubilant shout. "Yes!" She grabbed Evelyn in a fierce embrace, squeezing so tight Evelyn had to laugh. "You did it. You really did it." Evelyn hugged her back. "We did it." "No," Harriet murmured into her shoulder. "You." The walk through her home that afternoon felt different in a way she couldn't quite name. It wasn't that the walls had changed. They were still the same eggshell color she'd never been allowed to repaint. The carpet was still worn in the hallway where she paced during sleepless nights. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and dish soap. But the air was different, lighter. Like the house had been holding its breath all these years, waiting for her to claim it. Evelyn moved slowly from room to room, brushing fingertips along door frames, lingering over the sunlit window where she'd watched Maya play in the yard during summers. Each step felt like taking back inches of her life she hadn't realized she'd surrendered. When the front door creaked, she turned, startled, but relaxed instantly at the sight of her granddaughter. "Grandma?" Maya stood in the doorway, backpack sliding from one shoulder, hair pulled into a messy ponytail. The moment she saw Evelyn's expression, she dropped the bag and rushed forward. "Dad said you were acting weird," Maya said breathlessly. "I had to see if you were okay." Evelyn knelt, cupping her granddaughter's cheeks gently. "Sweetheart, I am more than okay." Maya's eyes widened. "Did something happen?" Evelyn smiled and nodded. "Yes, something very important." She took Maya's hand and placed it over her heart. "This house. It's mine now." For a moment, Maya just stared. Then emotion burst across her face. Shock, relief, pride, all tangled into one brilliant expression. She flung her arms around Evelyn's neck. "I knew you could do it," Maya whispered fiercely. "I'm proud of you." Evelyn held her close, feeling a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the house and everything to do with the girl holding her. Later that evening, as Evelyn stepped outside to toss a bag of trash, she noticed a truck pulling into the driveway next door. Brian's. His movements were sharp, frenetic. He marched to his mailbox, rifling through it with his usual impatience. Then she saw it. An envelope from the bank. Not one, several. All stamped with urgent markings he'd clearly never expected to receive. Brian froze, envelope half torn, eyes darting wildly as he scanned the contents. Even from across the yard, Evelyn saw the color drain from his face. Panic rippled over him in waves. Real, unfiltered, undeniable. He looked up. Not at her. Past her. Toward her unit. Toward the place he thought he still controlled. Evelyn didn't move, and she didn't look away. Brian didn't knock. He didn't call out her name. He didn't even pause on the porch. He shoved the front door open so forcefully it smacked the wall behind it, rattling a picture frame. Evelyn set down the basket of folded laundry she'd been carrying and watched him storm into her living room like a man chasing a fire he'd started himself. His face was pale, his breathing uneven. The bank envelopes were crushed in his fist. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "Why am I getting notices?" He shook the papers at her, voice cracking. "And why are they addressed to you, too? What did you do?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She simply walked to her recliner, placed a hand on the armrest, and gestured toward the sofa. "Sit down." The command wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Real weight. Brian blinked, startled by the firmness. He hesitated, then scoffed, pacing instead of sitting. "No, I'm not sitting. You owe me an explanation. The bank is saying my account's been flagged for ownership review. Why would they?" "They're not reviewing your ownership," Evelyn interrupted calmly. "They're finalizing mine." Brian froze mid-step, eyes narrowing as if the words were too sharp to process all at once. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn crossed the room to the small table where her deed lay inside a protective folder. She laid it neatly on the coffee table, its embossed seal catching the afternoon light. "I purchased the house," she said quietly. "Legally. Through the bank." His breathing stopped, one suspended, shocked moment where the world narrowed to a single sheet of paper. Then he lunged forward, snatching it up. His eyes darted down the page, widening with every line he read. "No. No, this can't be right." He flipped the pages as if a different reality might be hiding beneath the next one. "How did you even— You don't have this kind of money. You don't understand these contracts. Mom, what did you sign? Who tricked you?" The insult stung, but Evelyn let it pass like a breeze she no longer had any reason to chase. "I didn't sign blindly," she said. "I studied. I prepared. Daniel walked me through every detail." Brian's expression twisted, panic hardening into anger. "You went behind my back?" Evelyn met his glare without wavering. "You went behind mine for years." He slammed the deed onto the table so hard Maya's framed school photo teetered. "I kept this place running. I handled everything. You're supposed to trust me." "I did," Evelyn replied. "And you used that trust to overcharge me while you let your own mortgage fall apart." His mouth opened, but no words came out. The truth had always been too heavy for him to lift. Before he could recover, Kelsey appeared in the doorway, having arrived quietly but not unnoticed. Her eyes flicked from the deed to Brian to Evelyn, calculating with a speed Evelyn had seen 100 times. "Kelsey," Evelyn said with a polite nod. Kelsey stepped forward, her voice syrupy with forced disappointment. "Evelyn, this wasn't a kind thing to do. You know Brian's been under so much stress. We're trying to keep our family stable. You blindsiding him like this, it hurts all of us." Evelyn looked at her with calm that felt like stone, solid, grounded, immovable. "Brian's choices put this house in jeopardy, not mine." Kelsey's jaw tightened. "He was doing his best." "His best? Evelyn said evenly. Wasn't enough. Brian exploded. Ungrateful. After everything I've done for you? Evelyn's voice cut through his tirade like clear glass slicing fog. I paid, she said. What you could not. Silence. Cold. Absolute. Brian stared at her as if she had struck him. Kelsey looked away, color draining from her face as the full meaning settled between them. Evelyn stepped closer, not aggressive, not apologetic, simply resolute. You no longer have authority over this house, she said. Not legally, not financially, not practically. This is my home now. Brian's breathing turned shallow, his gaze flicking toward the door as though he needed escape. But he didn't move. Couldn't move. It was sinking in. All of it. The years of control. The quiet manipulation. The rent he'd depended on like a lifeline. Gone. He backed up a step, the panic he'd tried so hard to shove behind anger now flashing raw and unfiltered across his face. You can't just take everything from me, he whispered. Evelyn didn't blink. I didn't take anything. I saved what you were losing. Kelsey placed a hand on Brian's arm, but he shook it off, eyes glassy with disbelief. Mom, he said shakily. Please. A knock rattled the front door. All three turned. Through the window, the shape of a courier stood on the porch, holding a thick envelope stamped bank documents. Urgent delivery. The courier's footsteps faded down the porch as Evelyn closed the door, the thick bank envelope heavy in her hand. Brian stood rigid in the center of the living room, eyes darting between her face and the packet as though waiting for someone to declare it all a mistake. But mistakes don't come with embossed seals and tracking numbers. Evelyn didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she placed it gently on the coffee table beside the deed, two documents that, together, told the story Brian had tried so hard to keep hidden. The next morning, Evelyn sat across from Daniel in his office, sunlight pouring through the blinds in clean, bright stripes. Harriet occupied the chair beside her, still fuming from the confrontation, but holding herself like a coiled spring ready to snap into action again if needed. Daniel flipped through the bank's newly delivered paperwork with a deepening crease between his brows. These numbers don't make sense, he muttered. Evelyn leaned forward. What do you mean? He turned the document toward her. Your son filed annual landlord income reports with the bank. These reports determine mortgage modification eligibility and payment restructuring. But the income amounts he listed. Daniel tapped a line with his pen. They don't match the rent you actually paid. Evelyn blinked. He reported less? Significantly less, Daniel confirmed. According to these statements, he claimed you paid almost half of what your records show. Harriet's jaw dropped. You're telling me he underreported her rent? For years? Daniel nodded grimly. Which is fraud, not a misunderstanding, not sloppy bookkeeping. Fraud. Evelyn felt a slow, cold tightening in her chest. Not fear, but clarity so sharp it almost stung. Brian hadn't merely used her as a safety net. He'd rewritten the truth to fit his financial desperation. Daniel pulled her binder closer, the one she'd filled with 15 years of receipts, neatly organized and time-stamped. Your documentation exposes every discrepancy, he said quietly. Every false report, every altered figure. Harriet let out a low whistle. He thought she'd never look, never learn, never challenge him. And now, she shook her head, almost awestruck. He trapped himself. Daniel's tone softened. Evelyn, depending on how the bank proceeds, they may open a formal review. An investigation isn't guaranteed, but the patterns here are concerning. Evelyn absorbed that without blinking. She didn't want to hurt her son, but she couldn't protect him from consequences he'd built with his own hands. What happens next? She asked. For now, Daniel said. Nothing you need to do. The property is already yours. The investigation, if it begins, won't involve you. You're simply the tenant who paid every dollar you owe and kept proof of it. Harriet squeezed Evelyn's arm. You did nothing wrong. Evelyn nodded, though her expression remained composed. I know. But she felt something else forming beneath the calm. A sense of finality, a door closing, a line drawing itself clean and unmistakable. Later that afternoon, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she barely tasted. The house felt different again. Not lighter, not heavier, but sharper, as though the truth inside it had finally aligned. A knock sounded gently on the open kitchen doorway. Maya stood there, backpack dangling from one arm. Dad said things are complicated, she murmured. Evelyn set the tea down. Things are honest, she corrected softly. Maya stepped inside. Is he in trouble? Evelyn considered her words carefully. He may face consequences for choices he made, but that's between him and the bank. Maya nodded slowly, absorbing that with more maturity than most adults. Can I come here more? Spend time with you? Dad keeps saying things I don't understand, and I don't like being around him when he's like this. Evelyn reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind the girl's ear. You're always welcome here. Always. Maya's shoulders loosened. Thank you. The warmth that filled Evelyn's chest was gentler than triumph and steadier than relief. It was the simple, quiet joy of a bond unbroken, one that would outlast every lie Brian had told. That evening, after Maya left, Evelyn called her attorney, not Daniel, but a different one. A family attorney Daniel had recommended earlier in the week. In less than an hour, the document was drafted. Her updated will. She removed Brian entirely. No anger. No spite. Just truth and protection for the only person who'd stood with her from the beginning. Maya. Evelyn placed the signed document beside the deed on her desk, the two papers forming a future she had chosen, deliberately, thoughtfully, freely. As she slid the folder shut, the front door rattled. Brian entered without knocking. His face was white, his posture stiff, his hands trembling, not with rage this time, but something far more dangerous. Fear. Mom, he whispered, voice shaking, we need to talk. Brian stood in the entryway like a man whose world had been peeled back layer by layer until only panic remained. The letter from the bank trembled in his hand. Mom, he whispered, voice shredded at the edges. Please, you have to help me fix this. I didn't know it would go this far. Evelyn watched him quietly, her expression a calm he couldn't borrow, bend, or bully anymore. What exactly? Evelyn asked softly. Would you like me to fix? Brian swallowed hard. The investigation, the discrepancies, the mortgage review, I didn't understand half of those forms. I was trying my best. It just got out of hand. You know I've been under pressure. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. You told me not long ago that I didn't understand paperwork, that I should let you handle everything. She let the memories sit between them, not thrown in anger, but placed with deliberate clarity. Brian's eyes dropped. I shouldn't have said that. No, Evelyn replied. You shouldn't have acted on it. He winced, and for the first time in a long while, she saw him not as the man who controlled her finances, but as the boy who used to shift blame whenever his world cracked. Only now his mistakes weren't spilled milk or missed curfews. They were legal and deliberate and decades deep. Please, he whispered. Talk to the bank. Tell them the reports were a misunderstanding. No, Brian, Evelyn said, voice calm but unwavering. I won't lie for you. His shoulders crumpled as though she'd struck him. Then what am I supposed to do? Evelyn didn't answer. because it wasn't her responsibility to build him a lifeline he had cut himself away from. Later that afternoon, she met Daniel in his office once more. He skimmed the bank's notice, his expression steady. "You're protected, Evelyn," he assured her. The property transfer was legal, above board, and backed by clear financial records. Whatever happens next concerns the bank and your son, not you. A wash of relief warmed her chest. Not triumph, not vengeance, just the quiet certainty of safety she hadn't felt in years. Daniel folded the document and handed it back. "You've done everything right, and more importantly, you've protected yourself." When Evelyn left the office, she found Harriet waiting outside in the car, sunglasses on, iced tea in hand, looking like she was prepared to run interference with anyone who tried to trouble her friend. "Well?" Harriet asked. "He wants me to fix his mess." "And you're not going to," Harriet declared, as if the decision had been made for centuries. "Good." They drove home with the windows cracked, mountain air drifting in. For once, the world felt wide open rather than restrictive. The next days brought a shift Evelyn couldn't have predicted. Kelsey appeared only once, briefly, hurriedly, to pick up a suitcase Brian had left behind. She avoided meeting Evelyn's eyes. "Brian's taking some space," she said stiffly. "He needs to figure things out." Evelyn nodded. "That's wise." Kelsey's silence said everything else she didn't want to admit. She was distancing herself from the collapse. And from Brian. The woman who used to meddle in every decision now moved like someone tiptoeing through a crumbling structure, eager not to be blamed for falling bricks. With the house officially hers, Evelyn finally did something she had wanted to do for years. She walked through each room with a notepad, making a list. Replace the aging water heater. Repaint the living room, a soft sage. Tear up the old carpet. Fix the cracked patio step. Install a new screen door. For once, repairs weren't just deferred until Brian approved, or on hold until the landlord handled it. They were her decisions. Hers. Harriet insisted on accompanying her to every appointment. Electricians, plumbers, flooring installers, greeting each contractor like she was interviewing them for a federal position. "Don't worry," she told one stunned electrician. "I know how to spot a con." Evelyn laughed for the first time in days. They celebrated each scheduled repair with small victories. Lunch at a cafe, a shared slice of pie, a drive through the mountains. Each improvement to the house felt like repairing a part of herself, quietly, steadily, patiently. One evening, after the new patio light was installed, Evelyn stepped outside, letting the warm glow spill across the neatly trimmed lawn. She felt free, truly free. But the night wasn't done with her. As she turned to go inside, she noticed a shadow move along the edge of her yard, a figure stepping hesitantly toward the porch light. Brian. His clothes were rumpled, his posture slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. He held something in his hands. Papers? Letters? She couldn't tell. "Mom," he said softly, I need to tell you something." Brian stood at the foot of the porch steps like someone who wasn't sure if he should come any closer. The papers in his hand were wrinkled, damp from where he'd gripped them too tightly. His shoulders slumped forward, making him look smaller than Evelyn had seen him in years, like the weight of his own decisions had finally settled in places he couldn't ignore. "Mom." His voice cracked on the single syllable. I need to talk." Evelyn stepped aside politely, neither inviting nor blocking him. He entered the living room slowly, eyes flicking around the space as if noticing for the first time the renovations underway, the fresh paint swatches on the wall, the new fixtures she'd chosen, the small signs that her home was becoming her own. He sank onto the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, head bowed. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Evelyn remained standing. For what? For all of it. The mess, The confusion. He gestured vaguely with one hand, not meeting her eyes. I've been under so much pressure. Work's been unstable. And the mortgage stuff. It spiraled. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't mean to let things get this bad. He spoke like a man rehearsing lines for pity rather than accountability. Evelyn waited, patient, silent. Brian shifted uncomfortably, filling the quiet with words instead of truth. You know me. I'm not. I'm not a bad person. I break sometimes. And the stress with Kelsey and the bills and the house. He still hadn't said I did wrong. Only life was hard. Evelyn folded her hands. Brian, stress doesn't excuse dishonesty. Not with the bank. Not with me. He flinched but kept going, leaning hard on the script that had gotten him out of trouble before. I know. And I'm sorry I didn't explain everything sooner. I should have trusted you to understand. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. But you didn't. Brian finally looked up. His eyes were rimmed red, whether from genuine emotion or the collapse of his plans, Evelyn couldn't tell. Please, Mom, I'm trying to fix it. I need some help. There it was. The real purpose of this visit surfaced like something sharp beneath shallow water. What kind of help? Evelyn asked softly. He swallowed. Money. Just a little. Enough to stabilize the situation until I figure things out with the bank. You have the house now, so maybe you could pull some equity? Or give me a loan. His voice cracked into a desperate plea. Please. You're my mother. Evelyn lowered herself into the chair across from him, moving with quiet deliberation. Brian, for years, I gave you everything you asked for. Rent increases, extra payments, trust, silence, even when the numbers didn't make sense. He glanced away. You said I didn't understand paperwork, she continued gently, but I understand enough now to know that helping you falsify your way out of consequences would be wrong and dangerous for both of us. Brian's face crumpled. So you're really not going to help me? Evelyn's reply was steady. No, Brian, I'm not. He stared at her, stunned, as if the ground he'd banked on had vanished beneath him. For a moment he looked like he might lash out again, but instead, he sank deeper into the couch, hands trembling against his knees. Behind them, a soft creak of the hallway floor broke the tension. Maya stepped into view. Evelyn hadn't realized she was home early, hadn't heard the backpack drop, the quiet shuffle of shoes. But there she was, half hidden at first, then slowly walking into the room with deliberate steps. She looked at her father, not with fear or confusion, but with a dawning understanding that made her seem older than her 14 years. Dad? She asked quietly. Brian sat upright, startled. Maya, sweetie, I didn't know you were here. She didn't move toward him. She didn't soften at his tone. She simply looked at him like she was seeing the truth clearly for the very first time. You lied to Grandma, Maya said. Not angrily, not accusingly, just plainly. You lied for a long time. Brian opened his mouth, but no excuses came. Maya turned toward Evelyn, eyes full of a loyalty that made Evelyn's chest ache. Grandma, can I stay with you tonight? Evelyn nodded gently. Of course. Brian's face collapsed. Not in anger this time, but in the hollow realization of what he had finally lost. The envelope had been sitting on the corner of Evelyn's desk for nearly an hour before she finally opened it. Thick, official, its weight unmistakable. When she slit the seal and pulled out the documents, the faint smell of toner drifted into the air. A fresh deed, a certified copy. Her name, only her name, clear as mountain air. She stared at it, letting the truth settle like a quiet and undisputed sunrise. This wasn't just paperwork, it was liberation, inked, stamped, and legally sealed. Behind her, Brian stood frozen near the hallway entrance, the shadows of the room swallowing the edges of his face. He'd watched her open the envelope, watched her eyes move across the page, and now he waited as though the future itself depended on her next breath. "What is it?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn set the deed on the table and stepped aside. Brian moved toward it with hesitant, trembling steps. When he saw the bold lettering, "Owner, Evelyn Ward," his breath left him in a shaky exhale. This is final?" His fingers hovered over the embossed seal as if touching it might turn his whole world to dust. "There's no co-ownership? No transfer clause?" "None," Evelyn said calmly. "It's mine." Brian stared harder, rereading the same lines over and over as if searching for a loophole. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was defining. At last he lifted his head, eyes hollow. "Mom, you can still change this. You can add me back. Or list me as beneficiary. Or—" His voice cracked painfully. "We can work this out, can't we?" Evelyn studied him for a long moment. His slumped shoulders, the tremor in his hands, the way he looked at her with a desperation built on years of entitlement he'd mistaken for love. Then she shook her head. "I reconsidered," she said quietly. "For decades." The line landed gently, but its truth was a clean, irreversible cut. Brian swayed a little as if absorbing a blow he never believed she'd deliver. "So you're really shutting me out." "I'm setting boundaries," she corrected softly. "You built your life on the assumption I wouldn't. That was your mistake, not mine." He blinked rapidly, emotion swimming in his eyes. Mom, I'm your son." "You are," she said. "But you're also a man who exploited me, and a man facing consequences I didn't create." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "The arguments he used to wield effortlessly, 'You owe me,' 'Family sticks together,' 'I was helping you,' all collapsed under the weight of truth he could no longer outrun." Evelyn stepped toward him, her expression neither angry nor triumphant. Just resolute. "It's time for you to take responsibility for your own life." Brian's breath hitched, and for a moment he looked like he might fall apart completely. But Evelyn didn't move to steady him, not this time. Not after years of doing it at the cost of her own security. Instead, she walked past him, opened the front door, and waited. He looked at her, swallowing hard. "You're asking me to leave?" "I'm asking you," she said gently, "to go home and face what's yours to face." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, defeated in a way deeper than anger, he walked out onto the porch. The evening air wrapped around him as he paused, searching her face for something. Permission, hope, a last-minute reversal. He found none. Evelyn closed the door with soft finality. Minutes later, Harriet let herself in through the back entrance, a bottle of champagne clutched triumphantly in one hand and two mismatched glasses in the other. "I heard a truck peeling out of here like a banshee in a panic," she announced, setting everything on the kitchen counter. "That mean what I think it means?" Evelyn exhaled slowly, almost weightlessly. "It's done." Harriet popped the champagne with a celebratory whoop that echoed through the house. "Then we're toasting to your freedom." Evelyn laughed, a warm, unburdened sound that filled the kitchen as Harriet poured the bubbling wine. They clinked glasses, the crystal chime bright and liberating. "To independence," Harriet declared. "To peace," Evelyn added. They sipped, smiling like women who had survived something enormous. But before Evelyn could take a second drink, her phone buzzed on the counter. A new message. From an unknown number. She opened it. A single sentence appeared on the screen. "Mrs. Ward, this is regarding Brian Ward's pending review. We need to speak immediately." The next morning, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table. the soft light from the windows casting long shadows across the papers before her. She had spent the better part of the morning drafting the final documents: her will, a new trust fund, and a set of instructions for her estate. Everything had been carefully thought through, every detail in place, but one decision had been the hardest. She reached for the envelope she had sealed just minutes before, her hand hovering over it, as if unsure. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she slid it open. Inside, the letter was short and simple, words that had taken years to arrive at, but felt final, undeniable. To my granddaughter Maya, you are the sole heir to my estate. Funds have been set aside for your education, your future home, and everything else you will need to break free of the cycle we have lived. I have watched you grow with love and pride, and I trust you will take this gift and carry it forward into the world with the grace and strength I've always known you possess. You broke the cycle, Maya, and for that, I am eternally grateful. She read the letter once more, feeling the quiet weight of her decision settle over her. The finality was not bitter. It wasn't about closing doors. It was about opening new ones for the future. One she hoped would be brighter, freer, and without the shadow of betrayal. Later that afternoon, Brian arrived at the house, his footsteps heavier than usual. Evelyn had known this moment was coming, and she had prepared herself. This time, she was not the one who would flinch. He didn't knock. He simply entered, his face pale and drawn, his shoulders slumped as though he had already accepted defeat. He held something in his hand, an envelope, similar to the one Evelyn had just sealed, but his was trembling. "You've done it, haven't you?" he said quietly, standing in the doorway. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence between them was enough. Brian stepped forward, his gaze flicking to the papers on the table, to the trust documents that had been carefully arranged. He set the envelope down with a thud, his voice breaking. "Mom, you've cut me out. Completely." Evelyn folded her hands in front of her, her eyes steady. "You made that choice, Brian. You didn't listen. You didn't learn. And now you must face the consequences." His breath hitched as he sank into the chair across from her. He didn't cry, not in the way he had as a child, but the weight of the realization was too much for him to hold in any longer. "I didn't think it would come to this. I didn't think—" He choked on his words. Evelyn let the silence linger a moment before speaking. "You assumed I would always bend to your needs, but there are lines even a mother can't cross. You crossed that line, and I've been paying the price for it." He looked down at his hands, the reality of her words sinking in. "I gave you every opportunity," she continued, "but you never gave me the respect I deserved, and now it's too late." His eyes filled with tears, but it wasn't the relief he had expected. It was the weight of the truth finally catching up with him. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am." Evelyn stood, not moving toward him but walking to the window. She let the quiet of the moment settle between them, the sounds of the outside world coming through the open window, as if nature itself was acknowledging the end of this chapter. "It doesn't change anything," she said softly. "You lost my trust a long time ago, and now you've lost everything I worked for." The next day, Kelsey showed up, her face a mask of frustration, her eyes darting over everything in the house as if expecting something to change. "I can't believe you did this, Evelyn," Kelsey spat, her voice sharp, angry. "Brian's my husband. He's the father of my child. How could you just cut him out like this? You've made him a victim." Evelyn didn't move, didn't flinch at the venom in Kelsey's voice. "He made himself a victim, Kelsey. I just let him face the consequences." Kelsey looked around the room, her lips tight. "You can't just take everything from him. You owe him more than this." "I don't owe him anything," Evelyn said. "Not anymore." Kelsey stepped back, her anger sputtering out like a flame deprived of air. She turned toward the door, her voice trailing behind her. "You've made a mistake." Evelyn watched her go, the door closing with a finality that resonated deeper than any argument could. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. It was Maya, calling from school. "Grandma," she said, her voice tentative. "I just wanted to let you know that I understand. About everything. About the trust. I know it wasn't easy, but I promise I won't waste it. I'll make you proud." Evelyn smiled softly as she pressed the phone to her ear. "You already have, Maya. You already have." That evening, Harriet arrived at the house, her arms full of supplies for a small celebration: champagne, homemade appetizers, and a card that simply read, "To Evelyn, freedom." She handed Evelyn the bottle of champagne, smiling. "You've earned it, my friend. And now, it's time to celebrate." They clinked glasses, the sound sharp and crisp. "To you," Harriet said, her voice filled with pride. "To the future." Evelyn smiled, her heart light. "To peace." And as the evening settled in, Evelyn knew one thing for certain: the past was behind her, and the future, for the first time in years, was hers to shape. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet activity and careful decisions. Evelyn was no longer living in the shadow of the life Brian had tried to impose on her, nor was she bending to the weight of guilt or expectation. She was free, truly, irrevocably free, and with that freedom came the chance to shape her life the way she had always wanted. The house slowly transformed, each room an expression of her independence. She started with the living room, pulling up the tired carpet that had once been the backdrop to so many of her silent battles. The floorboards beneath were worn, but strong, just like her. She chose a soft, warm gray for the walls, the color reminding her of fog rolling over the mountains at dawn. It was peaceful, gentle, but full of depth. Then came the kitchen, her sanctuary, the place where she had spent countless hours baking, preparing meals for Brian, and later, Maya. Now it was hers, a space she could fill with the colors, textures, and smells that truly belonged to her. She replaced the old cabinets with ones that felt fresh, but not flashy. A clean, modern white with warm wooden accents. It was a room made for her life. As the weeks passed, each renovation brought a quiet joy, a sense of ownership not just of the house, but of her place in the world. She hired a local carpenter to help with the repairs she couldn't handle on her own, and every time he finished a task, Evelyn would take a moment to step back, breathe deeply, and feel the weight of the space settling around her like a well-loved coat. One morning, as she worked on a new set of plans for the garden out back, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened the door, there stood Maya, holding a rolled-up sheet of paper. "Grandma, look!" Maya's voice was full of excitement as she unrolled the paper, revealing a series of colorful sketches. "I drew a new version of the house. I thought it would look good with a garden in front. Just like we talked about." Evelyn smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. She had always known Maya had an artist's soul. Her sketches were more than just lines and shapes. They were a window into a future where hope wasn't just a fleeting thought, but something tangible, something she could build with her own hands. "Your ideas are beautiful," Evelyn said, crouching to look at them more closely. "We'll start working on that garden soon." Maya's eyes lit up. "You promise?" "I promise," Evelyn replied, and for the first time in years, the weight of that promise felt light. It wasn't just the house that had changed. It was her, Evelyn Ward, standing on the edge of something new, something hers, and she felt it deeply, in every inch of her body and mind. One afternoon, after finishing up some paperwork for the garden project, Evelyn received an unexpected call from a senior homeowners workshop she had attended months before. The speaker had reached out to her to ask if she would come back and speak at the next session on the topic of empowerment, independence, and taking control of your life later in years. At first, Evelyn hesitated. Speaking in front of a crowd, telling her story, it wasn't something she had ever considered. But then she remembered the woman she used to be, the one who had spent years teaching children to trust their own voices, their own worth. Maybe it was time to speak her truth. The event was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon, and as the date neared, Evelyn found herself looking forward to it, not with dread, but with a quiet excitement. She arrived at the community center early, the air cool against her skin. Inside, the room was filled with seniors, some quiet and reserved, others eager to chat. As she took the stage and looked out at the crowd, something settled inside her. She wasn't just standing there for them, she was standing there for herself. I spent a long time thinking my life was something I had to endure, she began, her voice steady, growing stronger with each word. But the truth is, I didn't need to endure it. I needed to live it. The room was silent, but she could feel the weight of her words landing on the listeners. They were all on their own journeys, but here, in this room, she could offer them a glimpse of what freedom looked like, of what it felt like to finally take control, to shed the weight of other people's expectations, and to live as you choose. That evening, as Evelyn walked back into her home, she found Harriet sitting on the porch swing, a bottle of wine between them, her grin wide and knowing. "Well," Harriet said, handing her a glass, "how did it go?" Evelyn smiled, the feeling of fulfillment still warm in her chest. "It felt right. It felt like me." Harriet clinked her glass against Evelyn's. "To you, my friend. To the woman you've become." "To peace," Evelyn echoed, her voice full of warmth and certainty. And for the first time in years, she felt the fullness of that peace. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to build, something to claim. And it was hers, at last. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, the envelope before her heavy with finality. It had arrived earlier in the day, Brian's letter. She hadn't opened it yet, hadn't been ready. But now, in the quiet of the evening, with the house humming around her like an old friend, it was time. She slid the letter open carefully, unfolding the paper with a steady hand. The writing inside was neat, but the words held none of the bravado or defensiveness she had come to expect from him. There was no justification, no excuse-making, just the rawness of someone finally acknowledging the damage they'd caused. "Dear Mom, I've hurt you. I know that now, and it's something I have to live with for the rest of my life. I was wrong. I took advantage of you. I believed I was entitled to your trust and your sacrifices, without ever giving back the same. I'm sorry. You deserved more than I gave, and you deserved better than the way I treated you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see the choices I made. I see how I hurt you, and I regret it deeply. This isn't about making things right. There's no way to do that. But I owe you this, the truth, without excuses. I'm sorry, Mom. You've always deserved more." Evelyn stared at the letter, the words blurry for a moment. It wasn't an apology she could ever truly take back, but it was something she hadn't expected. She let out a long breath, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. But she didn't soften. She didn't rush to forgive. She simply folded the letter carefully and slid it into a folder marked Past, a file she had kept for things that no longer served her. The closure she needed wasn't in the words on that page, but in the decision she had already made long ago. Her future wasn't bound by his mistakes, and she wasn't the woman she used to be. With a quiet click, the folder closed. As the evening wore on, the house felt peaceful again, calm, settled in a way it never had before. Evelyn moved through the space with a newfound lightness, rearranging the flowers on the table and setting out her journal for the night's thoughts. She'd spent so many years simply surviving, simply getting by. Now she was living, truly living. A soft knock sounded at the door and she opened it to find Maya standing there, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a slightly nervous expression on her face. "Hey, Grandma. I, I wanted to give you my schedule for high school. They gave it to me today, and I figured you'd want to see it." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with pride as she accepted the papers. "Of course I do. Come in." Maya sat beside her at the kitchen table, her fingers drumming nervously on the edge of the wood. "I'm really excited, but also kind of scared. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do after high school." Evelyn nodded, a warmth spreading through her chest. She reached across the table and gently squeezed Maya's hand. "You've got time, sweetheart. And when the time comes, I know you'll make the right choice." Maya smiled shyly. "Thanks, Grandma." As Evelyn looked at her granddaughter, the weight of years, of sacrifice, of pain, seemed to lift, leaving only a sense of deep, steady pride. Maya had grown into someone capable of seeing through the fog, of knowing when to stay and when to move forward. And Evelyn could rest easy knowing that she had done everything in her power to ensure that Maya's future would never be defined by fear or manipulation. That evening, after Maya had gone home, Evelyn stepped outside onto the porch, her bare feet cool against the wooden steps. The air was crisp, the sky painted in soft purples and oranges as the sun set over the mountains. She stood there, breathing in the familiar scent of the earth, the trees, the fresh air that always made her feel like the world was a little bit wider than she had once believed. This was the land she owned. This was her life. Her life. No one else had a claim to it anymore. For so long she had believed she was waiting for something. For permission. For approval. For someone to give her the life she deserved. But now, standing here, feeling the weight of the earth beneath her feet, she realized it had been hers all along. With a deep breath, she turned and stepped back inside, grabbing the journal that had been waiting for her on the table. Sitting down at the kitchen desk, she picked up her pen, steady and sure, and wrote the words she'd known she would write for months. Property earned, peace claimed. The words weren't just a statement, they were a declaration. As she finished the entry, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced down, expecting a message from Harriet or one of the contractors she had hired. But it was a new number, an unknown one. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the message. "Evelyn, this is Brian. I need to talk to you." She stared at the screen, the weight of the words lingering in the air. She had already given him his chance. She had already listened to his apology, already processed everything she needed to. He had no more room in her life. The phone buzzed again. Another message. "I don't know what to do next." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, then set the phone down, her fingers brushing the edges of the journal. The past was done. And no matter what he said, no matter what he asked for, she was finally free.